Isn't this package the solution for replacing my gum usage? So first, we will cover my gum usage in the past, why I used gum. Second, we will cover mewing and different parts of mewing. And third, we will see how what is in this package fits into this, and we will also take a first look at this package. So first, in order to increase the size of your facial muscles, you need to work them out, because that's called hypertrophy or hypertrophy. I actually cannot remember right now. The idea is this. Just like you need to train, you need to exercise to build up muscle size on your skeletal muscles, you also need to train in order to build up your facial muscles. Then how your face actually looks is a function of how your face looks, just determined by genetics. What happened to your face while you are living, if you had a car accident, for example, and if you have deformations, or if something else majorly happened that mechanically just altered the structure of your face, or if you broke a bone or something like this, or you broke your nose. So basically you have the genetic component, then you have the component that is actually influenced by your muscles. So basically, if you think of the body, what is in the body? You can very easily make a model that is, so the components of the body, very easily simplified, are bones, so basically our skeleton. Then we have very soft tissues, basically organs. Then we have the muscles, and then we have fat tissue. So the idea now is, if you take out the fat tissue, so basically there are two kinds of fats. The fat that is stored in between our organs and sometimes also in the organs, for example, around the liver. This is a condition called a fatty liver, which you just might get if you are a little bit obese. But if we basically take again a look into what the body is made out of, and specifically the fat of the body, then we have the fat that is stored in the organs, so basically within the body, and also in between the organs, and the subcutaneous fat, which is stored in between the muscle and the skin. So this is the reason it is called subcutaneous fat, because there is the muscle, and then there are the bones underneath. Underneath there are sometimes the organs, and depending on the location of the point of the body I'm focusing on, and then you have the subcutaneous fat. Now the idea is, the more subcutaneous fat you have, the less you can actually see your body. So the more subcutaneous fat you have, the less you can see your body, and the less subcutaneous fat you have, the more you can see your bones, your muscles underneath. So therefore, how a body actually looks, and also including the face, how it actually looks, is largely determined by the variables we can change out of these, and this is mostly not the bone density or the bone size or the bone volume. It's also not really the organ size or the organ volume, and it's basically the only thing left is muscles and fat. We can change the size of the muscles, but this takes time. So downgrading the size of the muscles does take less time than upgrading or upping the size of our muscles. So this is something you can change. And what it comes down to is the last point, how this all appears, is then the fat. So you can have a person that has a considerably or a comparably low amount of muscle, and this person could look very lean, or it could look very fat. This depends on how much fat this person has. So you could be skinny, but simultaneously to being skinny, you could also be fat. And you could also have a very large absolute amount of fat stored in your body, but you still could look lean, because if you have a lot of muscle underneath, then you have this effect where if this is your muscle and you then layer fat on top of it, it looks even bigger, up to the point where it flattens out because there's just so much fat, just as the sphere that is the Earth at a certain point looks just flat to us, but it's still a sphere. So this is basically the valley effect. I call it the valley effect because when it comes to how this appears to us and how we visually perceive basically how fit someone looks or how the muscles look underneath, is if you can see the valleys basically in the structure. So basically think of There are mountains and there are valleys in between the mountains. And for us to visually see something, you actually have to see the valleys, because these make things stand out. These give us something, a surface structure. And if you then have mountains and valleys, and then you cover everything with fat, then it just becomes one surface, and one surface doesn't have shadows anymore, therefore no valleys, or no valleys, therefore also no shadows, and then you can not see something anymore. Why is this also important? Because the face is just the same. You have your bones, you're basically your skull underneath, and included with your skull comes basically your jaw. Then there is the muscles that make up your facial muscles, and then there is fat that layers on top of this whole thing. And then there is the skin, obviously. So now, the key point is that if you want to appear as if you trained your face, you actually have to train your face, usually. This can be done by either indirectly training your face, by constantly having a good posture that constantly puts over time stress on your facial muscles and therefore develops them over time. There is also a theory about the structure of your face, so the bone growth of your face being influenced by how you put stress on your facial structure in the years where you grow up. This is basically called mewing, but this is not very scientifically proven, even though there are studies, or not really studies, basically studies and experiments both, on animals. So basically there have been studies on monkeys where they did let the monkeys breathe through their noses, and instead they had to mouth breathe, therefore they had to have an open mouth all the time. And what happened to these is they basically had teeth that were very crooked, and also the facial structure kind of diminished and just crooked inwards, you could say. So it didn't have a very positive outcome when it comes to just breathing through your mouth. And so therefore the concept of the study is that if you take away the constant stress that is put on your facial structure and also your facial muscles by closing your mouth and by maybe putting your tongue on the top of your mouth, this is what mewing kind of is about, of having a correct tongue posture. So the theory is that the tongue is an antagonist to the jaw muscles. So basically the masseter on the side, and there are also other muscles in your face, obviously. And tongue would act as an antagonist, basically these pulling the jaw upwards, and then your tongue pushing against these, and therefore creating pressure, and therefore basically creating a stimulus that would over time create a higher density and a higher volume of your facial muscles, and also a higher strength of your facial muscles. So this is the theory part. Now let's get into the practice, which is part 2, and part 2 is basically still kind of a little bit of the story. I didn't know all this theory about mewing and things like these. What I did know is if I chewed a lot of gum, and I chewed more and more gum over my teenage years, that my facial muscles just appeared larger, and this made me somehow look better. I didn't really know why, and I didn't really know how these proportions altered themselves. I just kind of saw it in the mirror that if I also, the leaner I was, the better my face seemed to look, and also the more facial muscles I would have, the wider my jaw would look, and this would make my face more proportional. There have been so this is kind of the face. I then decided to quit chewing gum because of the negative side effects of either the sugar in gum, and also the part where even if you have gum that doesn't have sugar in them, the sweeteners in the gum trigger basically also, or can trigger, an insulin and also a blood sugar rise or spike, which is also not very good when it comes to fasting and can create side effects of fasting, like, at least in my experience, this is not study-based or science-based, but in my personal experience, Andrew Huberman likes to call personal experienced data anecdata, which I find quite funny as a phrase. So in my personal experience, this tended to add to the fasting headaches I still got, because my body was not that accommodated to fasting still. So now you might still be wondering what is in the package, and we will now come closer and closer to what is actually in the package. So the story is basically that I tried to increase the density of my facial muscles with chewing a lot of gum. Then I kind of, a few years later, I dove into the mewing part of YouTube. And so there is a doctor called Dr. Mike Mew, and he has a channel that is called Orthotrophics. You can check it out. It's not completely science, it's much more, a little bit more bro science, even though he tries to basically up the level of his content a little bit in recent videos and in recent years. And I do think they have valid points. It's not that I do think they have valid points, it just appears to me that this is logic, or seems to be logical. So now, this doesn't mean that this is scientifically proven, and this also doesn't mean that there are no potential side effects. There are probably potential side effects to almost everything you can do. But a major benefit is that if your face appears just a little bit more attractive, and also if you have basically underdeveloped facial muscles because you chew soft things all the time, it's the same with an underdeveloped skeletal muscles. It's the same with underdeveloped skeletal muscles. Over time, these muscles degenerate because you go older, you grow older, and this means now that over time these degenerate anyway. So therefore now, while you still can, it is probably a good strategy to try to at least maximize the volume of these, the volume and the density of these. Not really the density, but just the size, you could say. These are all different perspectives, but what is actually the thing you want to increase? Is it the strength of the muscle? Is it the size of the muscle? Is it all together? Of course, they correlate. These different measurements correlate sometimes, strength and size, but they don't necessarily have to. So now, the idea is, you can do two different things. Passive mewing is basically having a correct tongue posture, pressing your tongue against the top of your mouth, against the roof of your mouth, and therefore indirectly constantly training your jaw. You can also do hard mewing, so basically just trying to press your tongue against the top of your mouth and just trying to do this as hard as you can. And this is the one side of the story. The other side is breathing through your nose. And the other side is to actively work out these. So when it comes to working out your skeletal muscles, the one thing you could work on, the indirect thing you could work on, is having a good posture all the time. And then the other equivalent would be to actually work out your back muscles, for example, because your back muscles pull your whole body back. And this gives you, over time, a better posture. So now, this part that is actually the active working out part is just called chewing, basically. And when it comes to chewing, there are now two different subcategories. The first subcategory are trainers you can actually buy and use. And these are basically rubbery things you put into your mouth. They come either as a kind of a small ball you put on both sides of your teeth, and then you can just chew on these, just like a dog chews on things. And I actually have one, and this is the one I still am stuck with, but it's also not the best one in the world because it already breaks, and there is a lot of stress on it already because I chewed heavily on this already, and it also is already breaking again. This is kind of the best one I found. I can also link it below, and you just put it in your mouth, and then you do this all the time, which works out the masseter muscles. A problem with this approach, so basically these are the two things you can do. You can either buy something like this, or you can chew something. This can mean that you chew your food better, which is another kind of indirect improvement step, but which is not so much part of the working out, because you won't buy 1 kilogram of carrots just in order to work out your jaw, because then you have the side effect of having to digest all these things. So therefore, when it comes to the working out part, the active working out part, the chewing part, you can either use one of these trainers, or you find something that replaces, and I just realized I have to cut this out, or you can find something that replaces the food you usually would chew. And when it comes to this, I basically for years then I avoided gum. What I also realized is, until I found something like this, because I didn't for quite some time find something like this, my masseter muscle size decreased a lot, which meant that your face just looks worse. Why? Because if you increase the size of your masseter muscles on the side of your face, what actually happens is the area of your skin actually, so the absolute amount of fat that is stored on your skin on a given body fat percentage level is kind of constant. You can do a few things like chewing very cold things, which actually kind of freezes the fat cells, which is called the cool sculpting when it's done in a cosmetic environment. But there are also, this is basically the children ice eating effect. So basically there have been children observed, this is kind of an observational study, I guess. Children just had these pop socket eyes, not ice, but ice cream, pop socket ice cream. This thing you can put out and then it's kind of water you put in your mouth, and then you have it in your mouth for a few minutes until it dissolves. So now the idea is that there seems to be an effect where fat cells seem to be more sensitive to the cold than normal cells. Therefore, these fat cells, to a higher likelihood, seem to die off after quite some time, after a few months, and therefore the faces of these children seem to have appeared larger. Not larger, but the faces of leaner. The faces of these children appeared leaner, basically, of these children that constantly had this pop socket eyes. So now, again, this is one of the things you additionally theoretically could try, but when it comes to chewing, the problem was with gum that I just didn't find gum that I actually could use which would not interfere with my diet. And now I just took a look again on all of the different options that were available, because what I realized with these jaw trainers, because especially with this one, is they put stress on the same parts of your facial structures all the time. Basically the tendons that connect the muscles to the bone and things like these. And the same is true for working out. So if you do biceps curls all the time, exactly the same way over time, you probably have a higher likelihood of having an injury, for example, because you just need to switch things up all the time in order to put the stress on slightly different parts of your body and in slightly different angles. So now this is where chewing gum again comes in, and I took a look at Amazon again, and there were a few products. One of these was called Jawliner, but one package of these Jawliner gum. So another point is that normal gum is just too soft in order to have a good exercising effect. Therefore, you need gum that is a little bit stronger. What you also could do is you could just chew gum and then let it dry, basically, and then it would get more dry and therefore it would be harder to chew. But when it comes to this being a hygienic process, you cannot have your gum around for 2 weeks because, well, there are also bacteria which then are very happily living in this environment. So therefore, the one thing that I found, so basically, there's traditional gum and also sugar-free gum, which has still sugar alternatives in it, which is not something you want to really digest over time or want to chew over time too much, because it also alters your gut biome, which is also not something that's very good and can also induce cravings, kind of. Then the second part is something that's very old, antique, that is called mastic. So basically it's, I cannot remember the name, but it's something that comes out of trees and similar to rubber, and you can actually chew on it. And the third part is a Turkish gum that's in this package, and it's called FALIM. So let's try to see what is in there. And this video got quite long, but I think I wanted to do this whole thing not purpose, but I cannot remember. So now it smells a little bit weird. This is the one without any aroma, at least I thought so. And you can find it on Amazon, at least I could find it on Amazon. This package was €6 or $5.60 plus €3 for the delivery, because I don't have Prime. And now this is what one package looks like. And now in theory this should be a a little bit harder than normal gum, and it also should not have any sugars in it. So what is in there? There is the chewing part itself, then there's aroma in it, there is color, a color pigment in it, and there is an antioxidative in it, and that's it. So there is no aspartame, no stevia, nothing like this. And let's try it. There was also this product called Jawliner, which had a few good reviews, but it also was very expensive. Therefore, I thought I would just try this first. And, well, let's try to open one package. And since I, in the past, basically chewed up to 10 gums at a time, also because I just wanted to have a larger volume in order to increase the exercising part or the exercising effect. So now let's take a look at this is how or what one thing looks like, and let's try to get it out. I'm quite unskilled, as I'm realizing right now. So this is what one package looks like, and again, I even have, yeah, well, and so this is one piece of gum, and let's try to see how hard it is. I would say it's a little bit harder than normal gum. It's a little bit soft. It does taste a little bit weird, but in terms of hardness, it's a little bit harder, or quite harder actually, than a normal gum you would get. It's a little bit more, it's not necessarily heavier to chew, but the last bites are a little bit more heavier. I will actually try this now with two, because what you theoretically also could do, you could chew two at the same time. It tastes a little bit like this thing called, I think it's called raisin. I just need to look it up right now. It's called tree resin, and the particular name of this tree resin that it probably tastes a little bit like is called Mestex, which is the other version, the natural version of kind of a chewing version that is not modern day gum. So let's try to throw in a second one. Yeah, well, I put it out again. And so what are the benefits of chewing something like this, in addition to having a jaw trainer like this? Of course, training also the different parts of your jaw, just like an equivalent to weightlifting would be weightlifting in the gym on machines, just this very standard movements, and then trying to do calisthenics. If you just can do weightlifting at the gym, this doesn't necessarily mean that you will also be good at calisthenics, because holding your body in different positions and also holding a front lever, for example, can be very challenging. Even if you do have the muscles, you still need the coordination, because you actually, in the beginning, part of the newbie gains is actually just your ability to control these muscle fibers. And in the beginning, you just increase your ability to control these muscle fibers. And this is kind of what is also part of the newbie gains, because before you just didn't know how to move these parts and how to also control and contract these parts of your body. So therefore, another benefit is that you basically have just a little bit more variety when it comes to the training, and also hit the different parts. Just like if you only train, for example, the chest all the time, over time you will become chest heavy, and your back kind of will begin to suffer from this, because if you only train the antagonist or the other part, then you basically are going into a state where the one part of this equation that is stronger, so the stronger muscle, just pulls the other muscle constantly. So if in terms of the chest, this could mean that you are constantly pulling forward instead of the back muscle also pulling backwards, and therefore having kind of a neutral position. The same is true for the face. So therefore, just having a lot more variety when it comes to hitting the different facial muscles is why I now probably will try this again. I am already trying this again. And the second part is that you can also train your tongue with gum, which you cannot really do with jaw exercises. And your tongue is also one of the facial muscles, you could say, which is, when it comes to mewing, especially important, because your tongue strength just determines how hard you can push up on the top of your mouth. I hope this was not too long, and that my English was not too bad. I I have to constantly work on my English because I am not living in an English-speaking country, and therefore kind of the only constant time where I speak English is on camera. And so therefore, well, it turned out how it turned out. I think, well, that's the end. And I hope you could take something away from this. And maybe you also try something like this. You can also try the jawliner, even though it's 5 times as expensive for also 150 grams. So these are 150 grams, and I don't know how long they will last, but well, that's the end.